So while everybody's coming up, I'll just have a couple of introductory comments and a little bit more introduction. As Gary said, my name is Clint Wheelock. I'm Managing Director of Tractica. We're based in Boulder, Colorado, and we're an industry analyst firm that does market research and consulting, all concentrating around human interaction with technology. So some of our key practice areas include user interface technologies, biometrics, digital health, artificial intelligence, robotics, and automation, and wearable devices. And we've done quite a bit of work specifically looking at use cases, applications, technology issues, market sizing and forecast for wearables in enterprise and industrial settings. And so it's been great to partner with BrainXchange for the past couple of events, and if you guys haven't had a chance to, I'd encourage you to take a look at a white paper that we partnered with the group on, 2 different rounds of it now, looking specifically at case studies of enterprise wearable deployments and exploring the wide range of different applications of these trials and deployments in the enterprise environment across all kinds of different industry sectors. And with that said, as a little bit of introduction, we're going to explore those use cases and applications pretty thoroughly within this panel session. And I think we've got a really exciting, diverse set of panelists joining us today that should provide a good bit of different kinds of perspectives, and some with, as you'll see, that have some fairly robust product and technology requirements for the types of use cases that they're looking for. But I think a lot of common ground also in terms of the issues that they're wrestling with, and that many people in this room are looking at as they explore how to implement wearables in their own environments. So joining us on the panel, we have Zac Penix from AES, Cory Simon from NASA, trying to go in order here, Peter Chai from the University of Massachusetts, Kathleen Deloughery from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and Daniel Gomez from the Los Angeles Police Department. And obviously we have some pretty mission critical types of applications that these guys are exploring from a wearables perspective. So I think this will, again, I think it'll yield some interesting insights. We'll have we'll ask everybody to introduce themselves for a couple of minutes. They will give a little bit of background on their own involvement in the wearable space, and I'm going to ask them also to talk a little bit about the different categories of wearables or the different categories of use cases that they look at in their own technology assessment and strategy work as they do the introduction, and I think that'll be a good lead into the broader discussion. We'll have a few questions and have the panel discuss those for a little while, and then I want to save plenty of time at the end for audience Q&A. So please be thinking about either based on what you hear from these guys now or a question that you might have had walking into the room, be thinking about some things that you'd like to hear from them, because we want to be sure that you guys are able to hear as much about what you're specifically interested in as possible. So with that said, we will go ahead and get started with the introductions. And Zac, you want to start off? You guys are familiar with Zac from the earlier panel session, but I'm sure he'll have some unique perspectives to add from an application and use case perspective.
Great. Well, hello again. I won't make you wait too long for lunch. Thank you for being here. My name is Zac Penix. Like I said earlier, I work with a multinational power and utility company. My background is in high tech. I helped start a couple tech companies, and then I worked for the oil and gas segment for a while. Now I work for a multinational power and utility company. And for us, we are a very conservative industry, and we very much have to be focused, necessarily so, on being reliable, being robust and reliable. If the power was flickering in this room, people would riot. It's pretty crazy. In fact, one of the best ways to track economic development for new countries is their consumption of electricity, which is really interesting. You can actually directly associate how well a country is developing by what your electricity use per capita is. So just to give you the mindset around what we're trying to do, we're trying to make a better world by encouraging the use of safe, reliable, sustainable electricity energy solutions. So for us, when we start to look at wearables, What wearables are is really us finding a way to enable our people and to keep them safe out in the field. So, roughly 40,000 people are working for or with AES at any given time. People are working in hazardous environments, and so we want to use wearables to keep them safe. And I would say that, as far as how we frame this conversation, first and foremost, when it comes to wearables, we want to buy it off the shelf. I love RFID because people have spent 40 years breaking RFID, and now it works. I was an early adopter of a number of emerging technologies in the wearable space, and all of them broke and disappeared. If anyone asks me, what's your favorite wearable? I will say my Fitbit. I have an Apple Watch, and I left it at home. And the reason why I love my Fitbit is it does one thing very well, and all of my friends use it. And that's kind of a trend for us, and when we think about how we implement this in a global workforce, is we want to buy something that does one thing very well that people will want to use. So to conclude my remarks, I'll say that the way we frame this conversation is, can we buy it off the shelf? If so, that's what I want. If we have to build it, can we build it with others? Are there industry partners that'll work with us? I'm going to try to annoy Cory later and see if NASA will help. And then finally, if we have to build it, we probably won't. And it's not because we don't want to encourage that. I mean, we are lead users. It's that, frankly, if we have to build it, there's not going to be an entire ecosystem that's driving and improving that perpetually. So we're hoping that other people come along and build solutions for the real problems that we have.
Great. Cory?
And I'm Cory Simon. I lead the Wear Lab at the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston. Excuse me. So NASA has a range of applications for wearable technology. Really, we think about the spacesuit itself as a wearable technology, and both in a microgravity environment, like when we do spacewalks at the International Space Station, and then as we look forward beyond that, as we visit asteroids and do spacewalks in that environment, or on a planetary surface like Mars or on the moon, we think of wearable technology integrated into the astronaut's spacesuit as an area where there is a wealth of applications to enhance their safety, autonomy, research capacity, their efficiency in performing really innovative tasks that they're working on, and then ideally their comfort. But so aside from the spacesuit, a lot of the work that's being done in my lab, we call it the Wearable Electronics Application and Research Lab, the Wear Lab. A lot of the work being done in my lab is focused on intravehicular activities, so work be done inside the spacecraft, and whether that's the space station or the Orion vehicle being developed for the trip to Mars, or whatever other habitat or vehicle it may be that NASA has in the works. And so I've been very happy to see, both in the panels and in conversations I've had with folks here, our problems are very similar. We have our astronauts, crew members need to be able to find a very specific item among thousands of items in a short amount of time. They need to aggregate it with another set of equipment. They need to perform a task that maybe they've never done before, or maybe they were trained for several years ago. They need to have access to experts in real time, or if say on Mars, for instance, there's a 20-minute one-way time delay. So they need to be able to have an intelligent system that works with them, a robotic system that they can work side by side with, and be able to accomplish that task efficiently and be as productive as possible. And so we see wearable technology as an enabler for a wide range of applications that are consistent with what the conversations have been here today. Just we have a unique environment. So we are dealing with microgravity. Wearables, we deal with unique, as a result of microgravity, hotspots, and your body behaves a little bit differently in space, and then we have radiation issues and some other challenges that are unique. But at an application level, we're largely in the same space as the folks in this room. So.
Cory, could you talk a little bit about the categories of wearable use cases that you look at? I remember
Sure.
there were maybe six or so of them in physiological sensing, environmental sensing, and a few others.
Yeah, so we are strong advocates of, as has been discussed, getting feedback from the users, letting the users identify their needs. In our case, our user base is a little, I'll say, smaller. It's harder to get a hold of. It's hard to do an interview immediately after they conduct an activity on the space station. But for every task that they do, there's a team of people on the ground that has supported them in that task. And so we hold brainstorming sessions with diverse sets of people within NASA and other folks, even our interns, we find provide good perspective on, okay, what's out there and what could we use. And so we have broken down kind of a few core categories, and there's even looking forward a larger set. But so we look at activity monitoring to enable integration with vehicles and habitats and robotic systems. We look at physiological monitoring for enabling research. It's incredible how little we actually understand about how the human body functions and responds to medicines and other things in space. We have voice communication, so more broadly, human-to-human communication. How do we enable our teams to act more efficiently? We have, let me think if I can get the full list here. Displays and controls, in terms of capabilities, how do we present information to the user? We now have the opportunity to provide tactile feedback to the person. So we have visual, auditory, and tactile feedback. So we have more complex multimodal display capabilities that we have access to through wearable technology. I'll leave the full list maybe for the panel to kind of discuss, so I don't take too much of our time. But I will say NASA is generally very interested in really all the use cases that have been talked about here today. There's a spot for it within human spaceflight.
Great, thanks so much. Peter?
Hi, my name's Peter Chai. I am an emergency medicine physician, and I'm a toxicologist as well at UMass in Worcester. I usually use wearables on Earth only, but our population is, I think, similar to kind of a lot of the things that we've already discussed. But we look at devices that we need 100% reliability in healthcare, especially in the emergency department, and we're really interested in the predictive capability of wearable devices and how we can power them without having patients plug them in. So kind of the two big areas that I work in are smart glasses, so wearable glasses for emergency physicians, and how we can use them to interface with specialists, whether they're within our own hospital or across the globe. So we do a lot of Google Glass development in the emergency department. And then the second group of people that we work with are patients. And so we look at kind of predicting health in patients, especially with substance abuse. So we look at wearable devices and how we can predict through physiologic monitoring, for example, when someone is going to crave cocaine, so we can intervene before they actually use and prevent addiction. So that's kind of one vein. And then we also are really interested in how we can use kind of all our technology is off the shelf, because I'm a doctor, I don't have a lot of money to do device development. So we need off-the-shelf devices that are very easy to use, they're cheap, and that people will actually kind of interact with. So a lot of our work is not only developing the ecosystem for our patients, but really finding out how best to integrate and prepare people to accept and use wearable devices. So I'll leave it to that and talk later.
Sounds great, thank you. Kathleen?
Hi, I'm Kathleen Deloughery with the Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate, which is the research and development arm of the department. And I work with our first responders group, and our key mission is to make sure that our first responders are safe and effective in what they're able to do. So we have a program called the Next Generation First Responder Program that's incredibly interested in wearable technology. The goal of this program is to make sure that first responders are connected, protected, and fully aware. So we see wearable technology being able to help us in this cause, first of all, through physiological monitoring, making sure that we're knowing the health status of our first responders as they are responding to a crisis event, and we might be able to better identify when a responder needs to be pulled from a situation. We're also interested in environmental monitoring, making sure that the environment that our first responders are going into is safe. If there are any carcinogens or unsafe materials, that the first responder is notified of that situation, again, so that we can pull people out if necessary. And then finally, we're also interested in heads-up displays to help our first responders stay fully aware of the environment. How do they move from one room to another? How do they connect with their partners who are in the field with them there? And if somebody does need to be pulled, how can we best direct them in how to leave the building that they're in? So we're really interested in making sure that we are creating devices that our first responders want, need, and will be able to use, which means that we're looking at different price points, modularity, devices that can connect or not connect with our other communications hubs, and just making sure that we're constantly reaching out to our first responder community and gathering their needs.
Sounds great. Thank you. Dan?
Great. Well, I am your first responder. So I'm a sergeant for the Los Angeles Police Department. I've been there for 23 years, and I've been fortunate the last 10 years of my career that I've been given the opportunity to look at new and emerging technology that applies specifically for operations. And my goal has always been, at the direction of my chief of police, two of them, both Chief Breton and now Chief Charlie Beck, is to look to see where law enforcement is going to be 5 years from now. And that's been my direction for these last 10 years. So every year we're looking down the road. And when we look at wearable technologies, I look at it as a big enhancement for law enforcement in a couple of ways. Some traditional, a lot of what's been already talked about, which I think is fantastic, but in a couple other ways, and that's going to that ecosystem of items, looking beyond just the glasses and the watches, but what the long-term effects of all these technologies are going to be. That's why I think what's equally as important to looking at the technology and then looking at the applications is also looking at the data that's associated with it, and then it really engaging in the academia realm. We partner with a lot of universities, because one thing I'm really good at is I can tell you how to secure a scene. I can make things safe. I can, if I want nobody to enter four corners, no one's going to get in. But what I don't know necessarily is how to take all that information that I'm gathering and then analyze it in a way that not only can I come up with a return on investment type strategy in order to fund it, but more importantly, how do I measure success? Measuring success amongst law enforcement is much different than in private industry. In private industry, there's the bottom line. In law enforcement, it's what you feel when you walk into a community. Do you feel safe? Are you willing to go down that block, to go to a business? Those kind of things are much, much harder to measure. And adoption amongst the officers is also very important, because there's an incremental piece that we have to socialize with the officers in order for them to truly want to adopt it. If they feel too much Big Brother, if they feel that their needs aren't really being met, it's rather the needs of the organization, there's a big pushback to the technology. And that's a hard thing to overcome. So for my group, getting to companies in their alpha and beta stages when you're in that development cycle is much stronger partnership. Whether you're talking NASA or you're talking any of the other companies that are doing wearable technology space, it's really understanding both needs, both from a security standpoint, battery, all the things that you think of for normal industry absolutely applies to us. And that balance for law enforcement is I think, we aren't allowed to make mistakes in two senses. One is we have very limited funds to be able to fund these programs, so we have to make the right decision up front, because we often will not get a second bite at the apple. And the second thing is ultimately it comes down to can we save our officer's life? Can we prevent the loss of life on someone else? Can't think of anything else that's more important or that is so final. We always talk about homicide rates in communities, because either you're alive or you're not. The stat is very specific. And so when we look at how we can bring technology into our realm, we look at it in those worst case scenarios, and that really is the worst case scenario.
Great. Well, thanks to everybody for the in-depth introductions. And I think that really sets the stage for a lot of the key topics that we can focus on. And one thing that a couple of you mentioned and that I wanted to explore a little bit more, because I think it's a key question, is this mix between looking at commercial off-the-shelf wearable products and solutions and apps even, and more purpose-built types of devices for particular types of applications. And I think one of the striking things in having followed the mobile computing space and devices and so forth for a lot of years is it wasn't really so long ago that the types of applications you guys are talking about, especially when it comes to something like law enforcement or field operations for an independent power producer or certainly the International Space Station, it was all purpose-built devices, and these were all ruggedized mobile computing devices of different types that were built for the task at hand, tended to be a pretty small volume as industry analysts as we try to size and forecast markets like that, and tended to be pretty expensive. But that's really shifted over the past few years, and I think it seems like a very unanimous focus on looking primarily at commercial solutions whenever absolutely possible. So I guess I'll ask the question more in terms of what are the exceptions? What are the cases where you really have to look at purpose-built devices, or how do the custom requirements of your use cases and applications influence that kind of decision, either for hardware or, for that matter, for software and apps?
So I originally ripped on, we won't build it, so I'll start because mine will be short.
Sure.
So I'll use a parallel example just to highlight the importance of this. So the main program that I run at AES is our drone and robotics program. And we, as a technology office, take a hardline stance that if you don't have a consumer leg, we aren't going to work with you. And the reason why we take that line is that we think that the consumer market is what ensures technology companies are going to survive into the future. So as an example, we're working on custom developed VTOL drones that cost $100,000. And the DJI Phantoms came along and they cost $1,000 and were just as useful, just as effective. We were working on a $500,000 Sense and Avoid project, and then the DJI Phantom came out with a $200 upgrade that did Sense and Avoid. So the consumer market's going to beat you every time. So to answer your question, when do we have to custom develop? There are very few cases where, and I would challenge everyone on this, there are actually very few cases, except for in outer space, when you're really going to have to custom develop a product. And I can tell you one that we're building right now, and it's because we just don't think the consumer market will get there. And it's a Fitbit that detects electricity, high voltage electricity, the electromagnetic field. So the concept is you're out and about working, you reach for high voltage electricity, and this little thing's going to alert you to let you know, don't touch that, that will kill you. That's just not something the consumer segment is going to get to. But for almost all other cases, I would much rather use consumer tech to track heart rate, proximity, to do visual surveillance, to keep track of whether or not you're in the zone that you want to be, consumer tech or a branch off of a consumer tech. That's what we're going to almost always pick 99% of the time.
How about Kathleen or Daniel? Because I'm curious from a first responder and law enforcement perspective, especially considering that this is one of the key sectors that has traditionally been dominated by ruggedized devices that were purpose-built and so forth and so on. And obviously this is an area where there's been a big shift. So how do you guys look at this question?
So our first goal is always to look for commercial off-the-shelf products or government off-the-shelf products that, if need be, can be ruggedized. We understand that the communities that we work with are often quite good at breaking technologies that we give them, so we want to make sure that we're giving them a technology that's going to work in the environment that they need it in. Having said that, we are an R&D organization. If we need to create a technology, we will, can, and have the mandate to do so. But with the caveat still that there needs to be a transition plan. We need to make sure that we're spending taxpayer money. We need to make sure that we're doing so efficiently. So that means that any technology that we do create needs to be able to be manufactured, needs to have a customer base who's willing to buy it. And since we're often talking about our first responder community there, where resources are constrained and vary greatly across portions of the country, that often also means that the equipment needs to be able to make it onto FEMA's list so that organizations can apply for community grants in order to buy that equipment. And that's actually probably also true with our commercial off-the-shelf products, that's a helpful way to make sure that they do transition for us. So.
Yeah, I agree with absolutely all of that. I think the one thing that I've learned in my career is that whenever anyone says ruggedized, that means expensive. Yeah. And that's the bottom line. And so we try to balance the fact of, can I get something that's off-the-shelf commercial at mass, because we have 7,000, so I have a 7,000 patrol force that's actually enforcing out in the field. I have a total of 10,000 sworn and another 3,500 civilian. So whenever we talk about moving to a technology in mass, that means a lot. Besides the technology, it means the training, the customization, all those things. So for me, the sweet spot is it commercially available? And the new term, which isn't new, but what we look for is it semi-ruggedized? It has to be good enough to be able to get us through about 2 years of a deployment cycle, where in the past, everything we looked at was it had to be, can it last for 5 years? Because we couldn't change the technology quick enough in order to kind of keep up. And so we used to always joke that we had today's technology yesterday, because that's really how we used to do it. But the market has changed, the development cycles, the way sprints are being done now. So we're trying to, as an organization, be much more forward-leaning relative to that. But in the end, when companies come in and say, we have this great proprietary item for you, that's almost a sure way to walk right out the door. So what we're looking for is, you may have something that's unique to or proprietary to your company, but do you have APIs and SDKs that I can bring into my modern systems, and some of, quite frankly, my legacy systems, some mainframe types applications that some of the younger generation look at and go, well, what the heck is that? So again, it's a combination of both.
Well, the semi-ruggedized point is an interesting one, I think, because especially with more resilience and water resistance, shock-proof, shatter-proof, and so forth devices out in the consumer market, the commercial market, it certainly makes a lot of sense. And compared to the exorbitant costs of some of the ruggedized devices in the past, you can replace a few of those if you do have problems or you do get damage and still be saving money in the process. Well, I'd like to go ahead and open it up to audience Q&A and see if anybody has any particular questions while you guys are thinking about it. And as the microphone is circulating, I will ask one more thing of a couple of you, and maybe we can focus on Cory and Peter, since they didn't get to weigh in on the last one, but I just want to get a sense for how you guys look at the human factors and the user acceptance issues when it comes to implementation of new types of wearables. And what's the process you go through? What are some of the considerations that you think would be universal to a lot of the organizations represented here, and maybe what are some of the considerations that are pretty unique to your own types of applications?
Yeah, I've been glad to hear the conversation focus frequently in the past sessions on user-centered design, allowing the users to drive the needs. In my lab, I'm an engineer by trade with a little bit of background in human-computer interaction. And I am within the engineering directorate within the avionics systems division. So my group is almost entirely electrical engineers focused on hardware design, communication, other things. But my particular lab is partnered with the Human Factors and Habitability group at Johnson Space Center, and we really work collaboratively along with some of our textiles and soft goods folks to do our development. And so from the start of every project, we have technical hardware engineer-focused minds coupled with the user-centered design, human factors folks, and we carry that project all the way through as a team. So most recently, we developed a clip-on carbon dioxide sensor for the International Space Station. They just started using it a few weeks ago. And it just clips on, monitors an individual's kind of air bubble of carbon dioxide exposure. It turns out your wall-mounted sensor air doesn't move the same without gravity, and so your wall-mounted sensor doesn't actually have the same effect when your person's building up an air bubble of carbon dioxide around them. So we developed a clip-on one. And the clip type, being able to operate it with one hand, understanding what clothing the crew is going to be wearing, understanding the other activities they're going to have to exercise in this thing, and they're going to have to sleep in this thing, and there's going to be several of them in the environment. All those things were part of the human factors conversation that really drove the engineering implementation. So, yeah.
Peter, anything to add?
Question right here first.
Okay, great.
Felipe with HEB. So continuing the conversation around the consumer versus the proprietary, and I get that and I agree in principle, but I also see that when you're talking about consumer products and companies, they're focused on the one-to-one relationship with the consumer. So you sell one device to one person and the communication and the data and everything else happens for that, for the most part. That's not always the case. So what I have found to be a problem and to try and work with these companies is how do we enterprise that? Not from a regularization perspective, but from a data perspective or a security perspective or all those other enterprise things that we really can't just shove under the rug and forget about. So I just wanted to hear some experiences around that.
I'll try and give a very brief answer to that. So it's a real concern. It's something that we've had to tackle in many different areas: hardware, software, network. You mentioned some good ones, cyber. Especially nowadays, like a company like Apple. You know, Apple may sell a consumer device, but they're now managing connections to hundreds of millions of consumers. They're dealing with privacy on a level that, frankly, most enterprises can't even begin to understand. And I think that in the nascent days of consumer-based tech companies, I think that I'd be more concerned than I am today. There definitely is a problem, and there definitely is an integration path that's necessary. I completely agree with you. But when we're talking about basic wearables, one of the great things about modern tech companies is they get APIs and SDKs. So there is an SDK for a Fitbit. It's a consumer tech company. It's robust. Their API SDKs have been tested out by a lot of people. Same for Pebble Watch and related type tech. And it's one of those deals where, and this is the end of my answer, to be frank, I would rather buy, if I have 40,000 people in my company, I would rather buy 40,000 devices that cost $20 and then spend $2 million integrating and solving that problem than buy 40,000 devices that cost $2,000 a piece. So I'm willing to spend the money and the time integrating, making robust, working on cyber, all of those things. Because at the end of the day, I'm fairly certain in such a nascent space like wearables, in 2 years I'm going to be replacing the tech anyways.
I'll just add, it's not really an answer, but just in addition to some of the problems that we're considering here, it's not just about integrating the wearables amongst all the individuals in your workforce who are using them. It's also, for us, about integrating this technology with all of the other technologies that we have our first responders using. So it's integrating it with their communications hub. It's integrating it with location sensing. And then finding a way to get that data, boil it down, and give the right amount of data to the right amount of people so that they can actually make good decisions. And then to take it one step beyond, it's also about making sure that the solutions are modular. The needs of the LA Police Department are going to be very different from the needs of suburban Atlanta's police department, are going to be very different from the needs of a rural community. and they're going to have different price points. So somebody might want all of the technologies, whereas others might just want these 1 or 2 or 3 little pieces, and we have to make sure that we can scale up and down our technologies to meet those needs.
Okay, one more question.
Hi, Aditya from Intel. So there's been a lot of conversation around the fact that there's cost constraints in terms of adopting and bringing on new technology, right? And I hear that echoed loud and clear from the desire to sort of take consumerized products and adapt them for your needs. One of my questions is the cost decision very hard because it's harder to justify the investment and expense because it's not obvious what the returns or the benefits are here today? Or are there actually, or does there need to be more work done to justify a return on investment to say, hey, if we make this investment, this is why it'll have a big impact on the people we have, what we work on, our KPIs or our output or productivity?
So I'll tackle part of it, at least for briefly, is the answer, at least for me, is both. It really comes down to, I answer to politicians, ultimately, that have to approve my budget. And for LAPD, we have about a $24 million technology budget. We have, 96% of our overall budget goes to salary. So that's a big impact on us. So the amount of money that I have left over as an organization, after we pay for our current tech and keep the lights on and renew all our licenses for all the different technology that we have, actually have a very small amount of money for discretionary funding to be able to go into partnership with the company. And really what you're asking from our standpoint is to take somewhat of a leap of faith that we'll be able to do all these things, and it's really a partnership and development. So where we've succeeded is when we do partner with people is not to pay up front. Is we essentially, because you're going to, quite frankly, as an organization, going to learn from our expertise on how we do things, what we need, how to approach it, so we enter sometimes into agreements on the cost side of it, so that we can prove it, we can show some return on investment, some measurable success, and then take that data and then go back and ask for the big dollars that will be required. A body cam program is a prime example of that, and we started that in 2013. That grew into our connected officer program now, where we're buying 7,000 body cameras, 7,000 connected device, and partnering with a major carrier plus an app development company in order to do that. For 3 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. But post-Ferguson, there was that big political push to make that happen. Fortunately, we started that, again, looking 5 years in advance. We were already prepared when that hit. So it's a combination of all those things.
Yeah, I think especially in healthcare, for us, cost is a huge issue. We're supported by NIH grants, so we have maybe $1 million a year to spend. That's after, then you have to take off the overhead for the hospital and our salaries and development and all that stuff. So kind of like what Dan was saying, we talk to tech companies and we say, if you can, give us technology for a small price. So we don't really want anything for free, because from the research end, it's nice to not have a conflict of interest by getting stuff for free. So if we can at least pay a small fee and get the device and allow us the time to work with it, to integrate it, our return is that we can deploy them pretty quickly in patients and people all across multiple different emergency departments, and we can really get on-the-ground feedback on almost anything, in terms of usability, what it's like to do energy harvesting on these things, what the data looks like, how physicians will use them or patients will use them. So that's kind of the trade-off. And then, if the device becomes useful and interesting, then the second question for us is really how do we bill for it? So I know there's someone else from healthcare in the panel before us, but one of the questions we have is, great, you've got this awesome data from a really sexy, cool wearable device, but is Medicare going to pay for that? And if it doesn't, at the end of the day, it's a really cool toy, but it's hard for us to maintain that device if we're not finding eventually a funding stream for it.
Well, thanks, Peter. And unfortunately, I think we're out of time. But as you guys can tell, these folks are just getting warmed up in terms of the interesting things they could share about what they're looking at with wearable use cases. So I would encourage any of you to catch them during one of the breaks or during lunch and have some further conversation. But thanks to everybody for joining. Thanks to the panel. And we'll go ahead and turn it back to Gary.